Yeah, Peterson's coming on.
Okay, so we're streaming now, and I will start recording.
Comes Debbie live line.
All right.
Good.
And I will call the meeting to order. So this is the Board of Education meeting of January 28th, 2021. This is a virtual meeting. We are recording this meeting, and I ask that all participants mute themselves just to prevent meeting interference. And if you're on the phone, you can unmute using a *6. I also ask that everyone wait to be recognized by the chair before speaking so that the people who are listening by phone are able to identify who's speaking. And that will bring us to our Pledge of Allegiance. I'll share my screen if you'll join me in saying the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, and following our pledge, we'll do our commitment to community, and I'll ask Mr. Cruson if he would be willing to read our commitment to community.
As citizens of our community, we will conduct ourselves in accordance with Newtown's core character attributes as displayed in our character tree. We will be responsible for our actions and show respect for each other. We will interact peacefully, productively, and politely. We will be trustworthy and honest and show compassion toward others. Newtown's continued success is contingent upon our ability to persevere, to follow through with our commitments, and to stay focused on the greater good.
All right, thank you. And that brings us to our public hearing portion of the meeting. And I don't see a whole lot of folks on the line, but I will just open up. During the public hearing, the board welcomes commentary regarding the superintendent's proposed budget. After
Michelle, you accidentally muted yourself. You muted yourself by accident.
How did I do that? Okay. So just after being recognized, if you could state your name and address for the record, and we just ask that speakers be respectful and limit their comments to not more than 3 minutes. Is there anybody on the line who would like to address the board now for the public hearing on the budget? And again, you can unmute yourself using *6 on your phone. And I'm not sensing any public comment. So I'm going to close out the public hearing. That was maybe the shortest public hearing we've had. So that will bring us to our item number 3, discussion and possible action to suspend the board's policies and regulations pursuant to policy 9314. And before we entertain a motion, let me just explain that there are 2 motions here that are related. The first one allows the board to suspend our policy 9314, which requires the board to go out to bid under specific circumstances. And then the second will address the food service management company contract, the duration of which is largely determined by the USDA National Food Service. So just in order to discuss the food service contract, we first need to know whether the board is willing to suspend the policy. So I will, unless there's questions about this process, I'll entertain a motion on the policy. and suspending it.
So Michelle, am I reading this entire motion? Am I reading this entire motion?
So there's one motion for suspending the policy, and if both motions need to be read completely since they're not written for the public anywhere. We would need to read them, I think.
So I'm going to read the entire thing.
Don't we only need the first one right now, and then the second one will come after we vote on the first one?
Exactly.
I only have one motion in front of me. I move that the Board of Education suspend the board's policies and regulations pursuant to policy 9314. Is that the motion that I'm supposed to read? That's
right.
it?
And then continue. Yeah.
Up until the first whereas, I believe, correct?
Okay. I move that the Board of Education suspend the board's policies and regulations pursuant to policy 9314. The policy to be suspended is 3323. The suspension shall be for the specific purpose of opting into the state's waiver that allows for the extension of the board's food service contract for one additional year. The suspension shall only be for the meeting held on January 28, 2021.
Okay. Thank you.
Second.
All right, so Mr. D'Elia makes the motion and Mr. Cruson seconds the motion. So this is specifically just about our policy 9314, and is the board willing to suspend that policy, presumably specifically for extending the contract. Though you're not voting on extending the contract at this point, you're just voting on suspending the policy. Does that make sense? Are there any questions or comments? Okay. So all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so that's, any opposed? None, so that's unanimous. So that will allow us now to discuss the food service contract. And that would be where the whereas motion comes in. That's the longer one. I don't know if we want to have Ms. Vadas speak about this before we take a motion. I think that would be probably best if we do that so that Ms. Vadas has a chance to give us the information that we're making a motion on.
Okay, yes, certainly. So good evening, everybody. So as you're aware, the USDA did grant all states that applied. They granted a one-year bid waiver on the RFP proposals for the food service companies. So normally the food service contract has to be bid every 5 years, and this is our 5th year with Whitson. So we would be obligated to bid this year. But since Connecticut opted into this program, we've been granted the opportunity to extend our existing food contract for one more year. So, I just want to speak to it and just say that, so many unknowns in next year's budget. I would definitely like to propose an extension to Whitson's contract. And, first of all, they're very familiar with our operations and our schedules. They've created a variety of lunch programs for hybrid and remote learners. And number two, they're also very familiar with the community, and they've actually reached out to our senior center as well as local daycares in an effort to increase revenues. And right now, I just feel that changing our food service company would not be advantageous to the district. So therefore, I'd like to propose just extending our contract for 1 year with Whitson's. And it would be an extension of our original contract that was in place 5 years ago. And again, it's just for this 1 year.
Okay, so having that information, and we can ask questions once we get a motion on the table. But so now, knowing that information, would you like to read the motion?
I move that we extend the Whitson's contract, whereas the board's current contract for food services has been amended to provide the maximum allowed for 1 year extension, CFR subsection 210.16 food service management companies, and will expire June 30, 2021. Whereas due to COVID, the USDA Food and Nutrition Service has provided a waiver to allow for the emergency non-competitive proposal procurement method to negotiate a new one-year food service management company contract for fiscal year 2021-2022. FNS document COVID-19 child nutrition response number 71. Whereas the state of Connecticut has elected to use the waiver provided by USDA Food and Nutrition Service. Whereas due to COVID, food vendor walkthroughs for the RFP process would be challenging under current conditions. Whereas Newtown Public Schools business director has recommended extending the contract with the board's current food service management company. Be it resolved that the board authorize the superintendent or her designee to notify the state of the intent to use the waiver, allowing for a one-year extension on the current food service contract with Whitson's New England Incorporated. Further resolved that the superintendent or her designee be authorized to negotiate a potential one-year extension of the food service management company contract for board review and approval.
Thank you.
Second.
The motion, Mr. D'Elia makes it and Mr. Cruson seconds it. So just to be clear, this is not, we're not approving a contract or an extension at this point. We're just directing the superintendent or her designee to negotiate this extension. Okay. Are there any further questions about this? Yes, Mr. D'Elia.
I'm in support of this motion per Ms. Vadas' recommendation.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Cruson.
I'm also in support of this motion. In addition to the reasons that were outlined by Ms. Vadas, I feel I normally would be very reluctant to suspend our policy like we just did and commit to something like this. But in addition to the reasons given, it seems like we'd probably have trouble getting a fair bid through a normal bid process due to all of the uncertainties that are out there. And I think having a one-year extension would ultimately be helpful in getting in a future bid process and getting a price that is more reflective of what we'll be experiencing up to 5 years out instead of just looking at the troubles we're in right now.
Thank you. Good point. Any other comments? Mr. D'Elia, did you? Go ahead.
I just want to make sure it's clear that we are not approving the contract. We're approving the negotiation of the contract, and then that will actually have to come before us again for approval. So we're not approving anything other than the ability to negotiate.
Exactly. I think, because it's such a long process with the food management company, I think we need to give the business director some kind of direction that the board is heading in. If the board was reluctant to do this, we would want to know that now, I think. Is that right, Ms. Vadas?
Yeah, that's correct. We're probably a few weeks actually behind, just because of the way things have been going with the pandemic, et cetera. But it's probably a 4 to 5 month process. So we'd have to get started on an RFP right away. This gives us a little bit more time. We have to wait for some guidance from the state, which will probably be out at the end of April, early May. And then we can also, give Whitson some time to put together a budget for next year. And then we can go over those changes to the amendment at that time. It's really an amendment to the current contract. So it's just an extension, I should say.
Which is odd. We do that extension annually, even though, yeah.
Yeah, and they're called amendments. But yeah, we do 4 of them after the original contract is set.
Okay. Does everybody have enough information to vote? All right. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Is that an in favor, Mr. Boros? Yeah, okay. All right, so that's unanimous, or, yeah, that's unanimous, and that motion passes. All right. That brings us to our budget discussion, and this is sort of a wide open topic, but just so that we're somewhat organized, I think we'll want to talk about topics by section in the budget book. So just keep that in mind. And then Dr. Redrig, did you want to give us some information before we begin?
Thank you, Dr. Koo. Yes, I would. I just first wanted to thank my entire leadership team and central office staff for their ongoing support in putting this budget together this year. And again, it was amidst so many obvious challenges and of course, uncertainty, as you all know. And I know I started my budget presentation with that in mind. But just a few things I wanted to kind of bring us back. This budget certainly reflects a genuine balance between some of the more typical requests and annual obligations. And we go through this every year. So those are pretty normal, such as increases in salary and benefits, increases in contracted services, but also additions that will both elevate the level of academic rigor, support for students who may have obvious gaps from the previous year due to COVID. We've included additional time for paras and school nurses to support our students to ensure we have a one-to-one technology across the district, something we were moving toward even without COVID. We want to continue to move world language through READ and expand it, as you know, which was presented in the budget as a core academic at the middle school. And this will certainly, we feel, provide a stronger foundation and a bridge to the high school. We have a new middle school schedule that will include some new courses, which in part will embrace, we're excited about having students be part of that process and their voices in the creation of those. We have moved our funding for social workers and school psychologists, some of which were previously supported by grants, as you know, as well as the addition of behavioral interventionists, reading and math support, the addition of special education teachers to meet the increasing needs in those areas, and the addition of a diversity and equity compliance coordinator that will help us create a safe, respectful, and equitable environment. We also continue to include curriculum projects and new texts that are going to provide what we feel is a much stronger conceptual understanding for students and staff development related to next generation science, the new K-5 math program, differentiation with a focus on co-teaching at Reed and the middle school, social emotional learning, something that is critical right now, and of course, diversity. And I feel that these are the hallmarks of our next year's budget. And if you think about it, with 82% of the budget related to salaries and benefits alone, we've included many needs in a fiscally responsible framework. And all that meets the academic, social, emotional needs of our students at a time that I think is most critical following a global pandemic. And just an aside, there are still a few unknowns here. I think we brought them up at the original presentation. For example, we will have further support, as you know, from NOVO and BOCA grants, which will hopefully provide some relief for those support staff I mentioned being moved over from grants previously. And just yesterday, we received news that the ESSER Part 2 funds are anticipated to be higher than double what we received in the past, and that was somewhere around 165,000. And that came from the state, and this can be used all the way through 2023. So again, this will provide further support to some of the requests in next year's budget. But I wanted to again thank everyone who's been a part of the development of this budget, my entire team, and of course to all of you, the Board of Ed, I know this is going to be a long process all the way through April, but thank you all.
All right, thank you, Dr. Rodrigue. So that's a tough act to follow. Does anybody want to dig in and start off with questions or comments? Bring up a topic that you want to. Yes, Ms. Zukowski.
Just the ESSER grant, is that noted in the revenues table?
No, that's not noted. We only have just heard of that grant coming through. It's not a definite right now. We don't even have the dollar amount, so it's not noted in the budget book.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anyone? Yes, Ms. Herman Stites.
So this is in the curriculum area. Is that okay to just kind of go to
Yeah.
an area of the budget? I wasn't sure how you wanted to approach it.
Yeah.
But since no one else is going, I guess I'll go first. I know that I had asked Ms. Uberti the question about doing the equity audit on the curriculum, and she spoke about waiting for the new hire to come on and how that would be a piece of that position. I guess I just have some concerns because I know a lot of this has come up in the peak subgroup, and I know there's a lot of work to do in that area. We have contracted with a great organization called Recenter, which I know that Dr. Rodrigue has spoken about. And so I guess I'm just looking for some more information as to whether or not we could extend their contract to start down the road of doing an equity audit on our curriculum. And that would look at both the curriculum and the delivery of that curriculum by our educators. I know New Fairfield is in the middle of doing a similar audit, and I just want to make sure that we have the space in the budget to start along that road next year, because I know that there is a lot of desire to do that on the part of the administration, our educators, and our community. So I don't know, Dr. Rodrigue, if you had any more information about that, or, thoughts about how we can move forward.
Yes, and so I did, yesterday was the peak subgroup, and that was one of the things mentioned. I did reach out to other districts about the potential cost, even if a lot of the work was our own, but we wanted to bring in others to look at various units. And I have mentioned this to Anne as well. I think the Recenter, as you know, they're part of our peak group, would be interested in staying on another year, because the work, as they said, 1 year is just not enough. And you probably wouldn't even get to that level of work with the curriculum, especially because they're really focused on the diversity coordinator. The other work around curriculum, working with Mrs. Uberti and Dr. Picaro as well. I would suggest that we look at perhaps adding some funds in that area, because I do not have them, to be quite frank, I did not add them in for a second year.
Okay. And so Michelle, you're asking us to make motions on Tuesday, correct? Or tonight?
Right. No, not tonight. Just tonight is for gathering your information. And hopefully then on Tuesday, we'll be able to make motions without asking more questions. And not that that's, hopefully we'll be pretty much what we know by Tuesday, but.
Well, I could tell you what we're, Tanya, just to be accurate, I think it was 35,000, somewhere around there, that we're paying Recenter. And I'm assuming we can kind of, if we extended that another year, then some of the work would include some work on curriculum as well.
Thank you.
I also just wanted to add that because Lori and I did talk about this extensively, because there is some work that's already going on. There's probably a lot more work going on than everyone is aware. But you do have to create a plan. And I understand that a lot of districts are jumping on with the equity audit. But we have, in speaking with our teachers, they're also asking for training to be even able to handle difficult conversations based on current events that are happening in their classrooms. They're very uncomfortable with that, depending on where they are in this process. So while an equity audit, I definitely think is something that we need to have in our long range plan, I don't know that that's the best place to begin, because teachers still need to teach that curriculum and they need to feel confident to do it. So I agree with, continuing on with a relationship with Recenter and creating a plan that moves us in the right direction in a thoughtful and planful way. So everyone is, paddling in the same direction.
Can I?
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, that's sort of some of the work that's been happening in Peak, is talking about what are the steps we need to take to get us into a place where we're ready to do that work. And I just wanted to ensure that, next year we didn't lose steam along the path that we're already going, and that we have all the resources we need to keep up that good work with the people in place that we need to do it. So I appreciate you everything that you and the rest of the staff are doing, because I know it's not easy work at all.
I'll add to that, just saying that I appreciate the approach of having it be something that we own as a district, not just having somebody come in from outside. And while there is, value to having the outside point of view and helping you understand what you're not seeing, I also think that it does need to be something that we own and that is something that's part of a culture, which obviously takes time to develop.
There, just one more addition, and Anne, maybe you want to talk about the student council, advisory council, because that again is getting student ownership in the process as well, which is really key, I think.
Yeah, we are in the process of establishing a student advisory curriculum and instruction council. We have, our plan is to have 2 students from grades 8 through 12, along with a teacher representative from the middle school and the high school, along with Mr. Picaro and I. We purposely have no principals on it because we want the students to feel that this is a facilitated conversation with people who have influence over the development specifically of curriculum and the delivery of instruction. So we have our teacher leaders in place. We're in the process of finalizing our students, and we have our first meeting planned. So we're very much looking forward to getting that firsthand student voice about what their experience has been and where they think we should be headed, because sometimes their clarity on these topics is much better than ours. So we'll keep you posted on that.
Good. All right. And curriculum is the appropriate place for, I know that Ms. Uberti had been, she, spoke with curriculum and instruction previously about the long-term plan and bringing in the student voices. So I know that's been in the works, and so that's good. So the request is to have a dollar figure. Is that what you?
No, I mean, I just sort of wanted to get some more information. I think Dr. Rodriguez already has a dollar figure in mind that she just mentioned in relation to the Recenter contract. So I think I have all the information I need, and hopefully, if other board members have questions, they can request more information as well.
All right, thank you. All right, any other, do we want to stick with curriculum? And does anybody have questions? When I said I wanted to stick with sections of the budget, I meant like once we bring up a topic, let's stick with the topic. That's all I was. So Mr. Voros, did you have something?
Yes, I'd like to I'd like to ask for Anne to give us an update on the conversation we had at the last meeting with regard to the new middle school schedule, in particular in the areas of the project challenge, project adventure, and the intended courses that are being designed for the children. I'm hoping that she can give us a further update on what that's all going to look like and entail. Thank you.
In relation to the budget, so that we know there's nothing we're missing, is that?
Yeah, so that we know what that schedule is going to look like, and what direction it's going in for the final puzzle pieces, and will it require any more money, or what does it entail, so that the courses that are in place are properly addressed as this new schedule unfolds.
Okay, thank you.
So I think I understand what he's asking. So regarding Project Challenge, I don't believe there is any additional funding needed in the budget. I know that there was a concern about how much time students would be engaged in Project Challenge, because the schedule change will mean the end of Learning Lab, and that is half of the time that a student attends that period. It's half lunch, half Learning Lab. But we are looking at a model where the middle school would follow a similar plan to Read, which is that those students would attend on a fixed day schedule, and they would miss specials, but those specials would vary because that schedule rotates, and that has worked out very well for the students, and it's been positively received by the parents at Read. So it makes sense to roll up a similar model. So we wouldn't be looking at any additional need for funding at this point in order to maintain the level of time that students are currently receiving in Project Challenge. As far as the new courses, I think that came up at the time I did my presentation. I also don't anticipate any additional expenditures other than what would have been required to run the 2 courses that had previously been in those slots. And most likely staffing ideally would be some internal shifting. So we don't know what those courses are going to be yet. We are taking our time. We are also looking into doing a student survey, again, to get student voice around what those should look like. We're doing an analysis of what students are currently offered, so that we're making sure there's not repetition, and that we really feel a need, but also that we feel a want, that it's something that kids want to take. So it's going to take some more time for us to get to the point where we know, where we can name those courses and come to the board with course descriptions. But again, I can't see at this point there needing to be additional funding to make either of those 2 things happen.
So just to follow up, so the staff dedicated to the Project Challenge is the same as it is at Read? I mean, same, I'm meaning in terms of, it's a 0.4 position at Read, it's a 0.4 position at the middle school, and that will remain?
I believe, and Tanya, correct me if I'm wrong, that right now that's a split position at the middle school, where a French teacher is a 0.6 French and a 0.4 Project Challenge.
Yeah, I mean, we have in Project Adventure.
Not Project Adventure.
Okay, because yeah, in the middle school, we have a program for Project Adventure, but Project Challenge,
I
I
think
believe-
in the special, Mr. Einhorn, did you
Yeah,
want to add to this discussion? I know that.
Oh, yeah, I forgot you were there. Sorry,
We're
I didn't
talking
see you.
about you
You're
as
right.
if
You're the
not here.
box over Tanya.
Ann is exactly correct. It's 0.4 for Project Challenge, and then the teacher also has a 0.6 for French right now. With the number of students, that's kind of the level of staffing, 0.4 that we've had in previous years, and that's worked. So that's why we're again requesting that for next year.
Okay, so just, I thank you for the clarification. I just wanted to clarify that it's the same as it has been, and it's the same as it is at Reed School, I believe. Okay. Were there any, Mr. Voros, did you want to follow up on that?
Yes, I would also like to make sure that we are investigating Project Adventure so that it comes out of, or right now it's incorporated in the phys ed portion of the program, that we might consider having the same model as we have in Reed for the Project Adventure at the middle school. So I would very much like, and I'm sure I'm speaking for a lot of the children, that we take a look at that and see if we can find a place in the schedule where it stands alone and has the time to be able to devote to it as we have devoted the time at Reed. Thank you.
So bringing it back to budget, I don't know if, is there a difference in the budget between what we devote to Project Adventure at Reed?
It's still the same answer basically that I gave, because if Project Adventure were to be adopted, it would be one of these two new courses. And it is something we are considering. Again, we're looking at a wide variety of options, but it wouldn't really change the impact to the budget.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Zukowski?
We talked about this previously, but I just want to make sure. So in the this is about curriculum, okay? It's going to sound like it's not, but when we spoke about curriculum and we spoke about the summer school and about the potential need for more than the normal number of students to actually participate in summer school this summer, given that, you know, the COVID impact. We asked you if you were, if there was going to be enough funds, and the answer was that you would be able to cover them, Ms. Alberti, from curriculum. Are you certain that you don't need additional help for, or have you been able to size the number of additional need this summer? And are you sure that we would have the funds available for that need?
So that's a tricky question. And it's one that I've talked about extensively with Tom and even more so with Kim. And the reason it's challenging, particularly at the high school, at the middle school also, but it's probably more critical at the high school, is it's hard to know until very close to the end what is going to be needed for those students. So what happened last year is it didn't really impact the continuing ed budget. When we determined that there needed to be some additional support for students over the summer, it was really above and beyond that. And what I was able to do was adjust some of the other curriculum writing that was going to happen and divert those funds to staff who were supporting students over the summer. It wasn't a huge amount of money. I can also add that. It was a couple of hours a week, because one of the benefits of being in a school system like Newtown is our kids have a tremendous amount of support while they're in school. And Unfortunately, most of our students who are failing are usually failing because they're not doing the work. It's not like they don't understand a subject and no one is helping them. There's a lot of support offered to their parents. So what we found last summer was a lot of the kids who did end up failing just hadn't done the work. So we connected them with an adult who spent a couple hours each week just checking in with them to kind of keep them on the path and helping them organize their work. So I would anticipate that if we find ourselves in the same position at the end of this year, that we would move towards a similar situation.
Ms. Zukowski, can I follow up on that?
Yes, go ahead, because I have a follow-up too.
So the credit recovery is something that the school district absorbs the cost of, is that correct? Or is there a cost for students who?
They typically do pay. There is a cost for students.
Okay. Ms. Zukowski?
I'd like a follow-up. If it would be possible, would you be able to get an estimate on how much you paid last summer extra out of your budget? And
Yes.
Let us know if it was for salaried staff or non-salaried staff. I'm sorry, certified staff or uncertified staff.
Yes. Yeah, I can tell you it was certified staff. I think we did have one non-certified staff who worked with students, but it was mostly certified staff.
Okay, and so on Tuesday, we'll have a dollar amount?
Certainly,
Okay.
I can do that.
Okay, any other questions? We're wandering through curriculum, middle school. Does anybody have new? Yeah, Ms. Zukowski?
Can we go back to budget summary?
Budget summary, sure.
Because again, just looking at the table of revenues, so we know that there may well be an ESR grant added to that. The question I have is, are there any other revenues that come in that are applied to the items in the budget? I know there's an activities fund, but that supports activities which is outside the scope of the budget. But the first thing that comes to mind to me is we have a special ed. We have out of tuition people pay, out of district people paying out of tuition. And I'm curious if that would belong on a line on page 29 in, similarly to where we have local tuition as a revenue on page 29.
Can I speak to that?
Oh,
Ms. Sveta?
So 29 it really just captures all the revenues that we, miscellaneous revenues, local tuition, and these are revenues that are turned over to the town. Parking permits, and we also include the state grants as far as the ECS goes. But the other revenue for special education is an expense offset. So that's included in our expenditures and it's included within our budget. So it really doesn't have a place on this page. That's all revenues, page 29.
So my next question would be in special ed, but would be with Dr. Rodriguez. If people don't mind, do you mind if we go to special ed?
Let's see, were there any follow-ups on the revenues? Any other questions on revenues?
I have a follow-up on what Tanya just said. So basically our total amount of what we pay on special ed is essentially what we see in the budget book plus the tuition that we are receiving from out-of-district students?
Well, the tuition is, we classify that as an expenditure offset. So we don't really, it's included in the expenses. It's included in the program for the transition program. But we haven't considered it a revenue per se. We use it as an offset to expenditure.
But can I see it in the, but it's baked?
It's not broken out specifically, no.
So it's baked into like the different programs then?
Correct, because it is an expenditure offset. We include it in with those expenses.
It's there to support the program. So that's what, as opposed to the straight revenue that goes to the town, as Tanya said.
Exactly.
It would be interesting to know what that offset was, if that would be possible on Tuesday.
From the excess cost grant, is that what we're,
No, she's
No,
referring
this is
to,
different.
yeah, to revenue for programs that come in-house for special education.
oh, okay.
We can provide that.
Thank you.
All right. Any other follow-up on what we've already talked about, special education? Anybody want to bring up a new topic?
I have one special education. It's
Ms. Bukowski?
not really special education. It's really about the contingency. Again, this is a follow-up on a previous discussion we had. And it was that, on page 7, it says that, where is it? Include adequate funding for special ed to meet anticipated enrollment needs, as well as maintain a contingency item in the budget based on a 5-year average difference to budget for unanticipated changes in enrollment needs. And if I look at the contingency line on page 128, that is within the special education chapter, I see that it's still the 100,000. We talked about what the 5-year average was, and it was somewhere around just north of 200,000 because a high-end year had dropped off of the 5-year average. And so at this point, the question is whether or not we should hike that up to the actual 5-year average, or we should just simply drop the second part of that bullet off page 7. I can give you my recommendation, but I don't know if that's something we talk about here or we would talk about it on Tuesday.
I mean, I think it would come as a specific motion on Tuesday, but are you looking for a specific number for what the 5-year average is?
To be honest, what I'm looking for is for it to be stricken from page 7, and that we don't deal with it this year because there's so much else going on all around the, with the COVID stuff, with cross-board work that we're going to be doing with the Board of Finance and all of that, which, trust me, this will probably be coming up. I think there's a lot of things in the air, and unless we really need it, my sense is we leave it as is for this year.
Mr. Cruson, did you?
Page 7 was something we voted on ahead of the budget being made and was simply a guidance document for the creation of the budget. I don't think we need to amend it to strike a part of one of those bullets just because we didn't necessarily meet it. I see it kind of as a wish list and this is what we'd like to see as the budget's being built.
Okay.
As for having the discussion about whether to, I do think there's a valid discussion as to whether we feel it was important enough to amend the budget to meet that goal. I do think that's a valid discussion, but I don't think amending page 7 really matters in the long run.
I would agree, and I guess I think that we should be fully funding that special education line. I don't think that if we keep ignoring it, it's worth using. I think that the motion that we add that to our goals was a good one. And I'll leave it at that. Is anybody else? Yes, Ms. Zukowski?
So one other thing we could do is we could plan on putting some surplus from the end of the year and say this is to meet the 5-year average of overage from, and just put it into the non-lapsing account and keep it, we'll have it available that way, but it won't necessarily be in the budget. Over and above the 100,000, we keep the 100,000 in the budget for this year. So there are all sorts of different ways to work with this.
That's assuming there's a surplus at the end of the year. I mean, there always is, but that's, I don't know that we know that at this point. All right, any other, does anybody else want to weigh in on that topic, or I don't think so. Does anybody want to bring up a new topic? Everybody's questions have been, Mr. D'Elia?
I have a question around pupil services, pupil personnel. I guess, I don't know if this is for Dr. Longabuco or for Mrs. Peterson. I'm just curious. I was very alarmed, or I don't know. Yeah, we were all equally concerned with the number of kids that weren't engaged virtually. And I just want to make sure that I was wondering what your thoughts were on the staffing at the guidance level as far as what our needs are going to be next year in the high school for students who were not engaged, to help them catch up.
I think we are adequately staffed, both in the counseling and in the area of PPS with school psychologists and social workers. I think that the engagement on our end, staffing wise, is there. The difficulty is really connecting with these students who are completely disengaged at home. And part of the challenge is that we are not doing home visits now for obvious reasons, where we would typically before, and some students are not able or unwilling to participate on a Google Meet, which is really the only face-to-face contact we're having. So I don't know that it's necessarily a staffing issue as much as it is a situational issue that we're in right now. But I do feel like now that we have been back with more students at school, that is already starting to fix itself.
Yeah, Mr. D'Elia, did you want to follow up?
Yeah, I guess I need to clarify. I'm just wondering if we're anticipating more of a need at the student level. I'm not commenting on staff working hard to try to connect with the kids. I'm saying, you know, we have a lot of kids that aren't engaged, and a lot of them are going to be back in school next year, hopefully. And will we need more counselors or social workers at the high school to help? I guess that was what I meant, Dr. Longabuco.
Yes, and I apologize if I wasn't clear. That's what I was answering as well. I don't believe that we will need more than we currently have in the area of counseling or in PPS.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Mr. D'Elia?
This is a new topic, okay?
Yeah, that's great.
I'd like to talk about enrollment. I'll just share my concerns, and I'm wondering if other board members can chime in. I guess one of my concerns is that we're using the study that was taken before COVID happened. And it shows a significant increase in certain populations. And my concern is if we hire teachers and then the population doesn't go up. You know, I guess how would we respond to that? How would the school or the district respond to hiring more teachers and under the pretense that the population is going to grow by a significant amount at certain grades, and then the population actually doesn't? What would happen?
So can I respond to that? And Tanya and I actually looked at this for the last month in looking at Prouda's predictions and looking at those schools that every school had students who were disenrolled for, you know, obvious reasons. And we also looked at Prouda's predictions for this year, which were pretty much right on target, very accurate. So we had to sort of blend the projection, knowing that when he did his prediction, he obviously did not include anything to do with COVID, and then look at those that were disenrolled. So we actually put a graph together that I'm looking at here, but just so I can verbally articulate it to you. This kind of thing happens even without COVID. So there are years where we see a projection that is higher than we imagined in certain grade levels at certain schools and different at other schools. And you look at kind of the plus and minuses. So if it's a wash in a certain grade level, or it's a plus in one and a minus in another, we put kind of hedged our bets on one grade level and it didn't come to fruition. But we are able to utilize another staff member in another area because of enrollment. So we see that happening here. I can tell you that when we look at Holly, we added the +1, correct, Chris, at the kindergarten level. We added a +1 at Sandy Hook. Middlegate is kind of a +1 and a -1, so it's a wash there, and a +1 at Hedda Meadow. When we look at we actually put the projection, we looked at the disenrolled students. If we add those to the projection, what would it come out to be? And we actually looked at which schools were and which grade levels were problem areas. We feel very strongly that even if something doesn't come to fruition in one area, we have another area where it could actually take the place of that and fill that gap. Now, again, I want to be very clear that we go through this every year, not just during COVID, where we kind of look at the prediction, and that's the best we can get. We look at what we've seen over a trend. And in this case, it was much harder this year because we had the added challenge of those students that were pulled out for a year for COVID, and to kind of put that back into, without corrupting the data of the PROUDA, because you can't do that, but we did actually put those disenrolled students back. For example, I think it was Sandy Hook, where we added the +1 because we felt that the PROUDA prediction was not, we didn't feel it was high enough. So we added the +1 there in first grade. So again, if the prediction comes true and it's lower than we expected, and we get to kind of use that in other places. So it is a bit of a, I don't want to say a crapshoot, but what I want to say is that it is a prediction no matter how you look at it. I think with these challenges this year, we also have, as you know, the retirement package. So we look at attrition and those that are retiring. And, there could be an area there if we absolutely needed it based on enrollment. We don't do any of the class enrollment and the scheduling until much later. That's the problem. At high school, at the middle school, we don't really do that until after the budget is put into place. But we often either need something because of the scheduling that is done later. And Kim knows, and other principals know, I've come forward as a principal because we didn't really anticipate, even with all the predictions, where a certain after scheduling might need another half of a teacher or a full teacher. The same is true in the opposite. So with an incentive package and natural attrition of people retiring, we could look at some wiggle room there as well, where we didn't need it here, but we put it somewhere else in the district. So I feel strongly that these are as close as we're going to get to accurate in a year of uncertainty, Dan. And again, I can't say that with all certainty, as I can't say that every year, but we come pretty darn close. And I've come to you to ask for an elementary teacher because, again, the projections were not accurate, or we didn't anticipate third grade for some reason going up in one particular school. But I think we've come pretty close, given all of the factors that we had to weighed in to putting this together. I don't know, Tanya, you and I spoke we put a lot of effort into this, I think, and talked to all the principals as well. It was not easy this year, and I'm hearing that across the state when it comes to enrollment. So it's not just new to Newtown, obviously, but any other insights, Tanya, that you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off of what you said, we looked at the students that disenrolled and we compared it to the classes that we have today, and then we rolled them forward. We looked at them, with the disenrollees added back in. We looked at it every which way possible, and we came up to the same conclusion that at the end of the day, I believe it was a +1, or it was a potential +1 in one grade and a potential -1 in or another classroom. So the one teacher could be used in one area, or taken from another area to be used. So it worked out at the end of the day to be exactly what we have in our budget book.
Yes.
And also, we did include that +1 for the Head of Meadow kindergarten because we felt like the projection was a little bit low. So we do have that, discretionary teacher that's included, and I presented that on Tuesday night. So.
I think the biggest concern I have is, and the one thing I don't think any district knows right now, post-COVID, at some point in the future, is the mobility. And, that certainly is going to be a factor, probably across the nation. And that we just have to, it's a wait and see. But I feel very confident that we did our due diligence with the predictions and the disenrolled students and adding that in. And it really came very, very close across the board in every school.
I just want to kind of add one more thing. Like you said, Dr. Rodrigue, you get these numbers later on in the year and we can make adjustments, not later on in the year, but in a couple of months or, in March and April. And just as a fact, this past year, we made an adjustment in June for the teachers for the current budget. So.
All right. Mr. D'Elia, did you want to follow up, and then Ms. Zukowski?
What is the timing if the board approves all these new hires? Do you do it right away, or do you kind of wait until closer to? Could you just speak to that for me?
Yes, we wait until the budget is approved. If they're new positions, we have to wait till the budget's approved.
Ms. Zukowski?
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're muted.
I just want to agree with Mr. D'Elia. When I first saw the projections, I was, I could tell they were proud of projections, and I was, and it looked like that we were coming in well low. But the discussion we had, which I followed up on with a real estate agent, the discussion we had about the non-enrolled, that there being 67 students who were non-enrolled, in the breakdown across the different schools. I had looked and I had calculated also, and I could see that one looked like it was, the class wouldn't get quite so big, but another place looked like the class was probably going to be bigger if you were, going off what the current enrollments are. But the thing that finally made me feel much more comfortable with the teacher assignments that you have to do with this that I got from the real estate agent. And what this says, because I'm not going to have you all read it, because that's what it says, is looking and comparing from last year to this year and hearing what Dr. Correa had talked about with dozens of students, coming in the summer before to read. This basically says, if we look year to date from last December to this past December, year to date, there were, we are running about 150 single family houses higher. We're running about, in terms of closed sales, but also more importantly, in terms of pending sales, we're running about 150 houses higher. So we're running about 40% higher than in terms of the market, the real estate market for single family houses for this particular year, in terms of pending sales and closed sales both, which would mean if you're going for single family houses, you probably do have children who will be coming to the school year. So it's really, at this point, if you don't mind my saying, it's a crapshoot. But I am more confident that we may have more students than we're actually anticipating, at least in the K through 6 group. So I was, because of the discussion we had last time and then this added information I actually was able to gather, I am now comfortable with the projections.
All right. Yeah, and in some, I mean, you have to pick something. You have to,
Yes.
there are really two methods of doing the projections that we've used. And one is using the Prouda projections or using internal projections. And I think you have to pick one. And in my mind, the Prouda projections are probably more likely to be accurate than the internal projections, just because of the disenrolled students.
Well, and it's interesting, we had that discussion with all the area superintendents, and very clearly the response was that he has been extremely accurate over other organizations that do the same work. So
It's interesting that it is, as Ms. Zukowski says, that it's the K through 6 that really varies, and what, like 7 through 12, it really, his projections for this year are really spot on, which is surprising to me. I would think that it would be the high school students that would be more easily disenrolled, you know, homeschooling or unenrolled, but maybe that's because of Mr. Moretti. Did you have some ideas on that?
No, I just wanted to share if it helps ease people's minds. So like, for example, I'm supposed to add that 4th kindergarten section based on the projections. We're going to start enrolling kids shortly, and the names are going to start filling up in our database, and we're going to start getting a very good idea of what our numbers are going to be for next year. By the time the budget passes, if my numbers are significantly lower than the projections, and I'm not approaching that number, I think it would be 64, that would push me into a 4th section. Then I call Dr. Rodrigue and I say, my numbers aren't really approaching. And then we monitor it. And then, like, if at Hedda Meadow, a 2nd grade explodes out of the blue, that could be where the position ends up going. If my numbers do get to the point where that position would be needed, then I would call Dr. Rodrigue after the budget is passed, and I would say, my numbers are up there. When would you like me to post the position and hire? And then we make that decision together. I don't know if that helps, but that's a good example of the fluidness of the situation.
Thank you. That helps. All right, Mr. Cruson?
To sort of piggyback / answer the question that you posed about the high schools, I think in the current situation, probably something that has maybe prevented some of that is the fact that a lot of the local schools that high schoolers might choose to attend alternatively, like Henry Abbott Tech and such, either they didn't open. They didn't open, or they took a long time to open. So I think that may be part of what we're seeing there. There's just fewer options for where those high school students could attend alternatively, whereas a lot of the private schools that were K-8 were open or running in some capacity. Whether we see those students bounce back or not, that's where the crapshoot comes in, because we don't know what they're going to do. It sounds like from all of our discussions previously, it sounds like the principals do have a good idea of what the current intent is of those families, which gave me some level of comfort with the numbers and the projections. The fact that the principals they kept saying, I had heard from those families, they had previously said it's only going to be a year, or when I checked in, they said it's only going to be for this year. So, I mean, it does always come down to they could change their mind at the last minute, but we can only work with the best data we have at the time. And I'd actually rather see us put money. I'd hate to see us in a position where we suddenly need 5 teachers and we have to figure out, well, what comes out of the budget to make that happen because we didn't put the money in there to begin with. And hearing Mr. Moretti say, well, when I approach the threshold, that's when we have the discussion about posting the position. The idea that the teachers don't get hired until we actually know we're going to need them. It then just comes down to a question of, are we better having extra money in the budget in case we need it? Or are we better trimming it close to what we think we need and running short? And I think that's where everyone has to decide where they fall on that. Would they rather cut it close and hope, or have a little bit of padding there and then unfortunately have to say, yeah, we have extra money? Neither is a great position to be in, but in a year like this, I don't see a way. I don't see a third option. So
Yeah, thank you. Good points. Mr. D'Elia, did you have something?
And my concerns are not just at the elementary level, and I'll explain to you my thinking just so that the board understands. So if we're predicting that we need an elementary teacher, and Mr. Moretti, thank you for that explanation. I really appreciate it. They predicted that elementary is going to go up, but they also predicted high school is going to go down. And I'm saying, what if they're wrong? What if we end up needing more high school teachers, but we hire elementary school teachers? And I guess I know that you just do your best to make the predictions. I'm just saying, I want to make sure that we're best prepared to serve every student. And I'll give you an example and then I'll stop because, I've said enough, I think, tonight. But the junior class is, maybe I'm reading this wrong even, 355 students. Or no, the sophomore class is 362 students, and they're predicting that's going to drop to 349. So it's like when you see numbers like that, I worry that sometimes our predictions, I just want to err on the side that's best serves the students, I guess is what I'm saying, at all grades. And so I didn't mean to point out just elementary, and maybe it sounded that way, but I just want to make sure that we're preparing for what I think is a significant need for all students. Okay? And I'm not going to say any more. That's it. Thank you for listening to me.
All right. Ms. Leidline and then Ms. Zukowski.
So in my experience, it's very important that we make data-driven decisions, and we have a methodology that we use with continuity each year when developing the budget in order to make the best decisions possible going forward for our staffing needs. I have seen over the years that there have been teachers that have been hired and they've been moved within their grade level certification, and that if in fact there is a need in an area, that it typically is offset by the decline of a need in another area. So I trust the data that's being used in order to make these decisions with regard to staffing and with regard to the dollar amounts. There's a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration, such as the teachers moving, teachers retiring. Teachers often want to be, have reassignments. Teachers who are there for 1 year can be hired in on a more permanent basis. There's a lot of factors that go into the staffing decision making, and so I'm very comfortable and trust in the process which we've used repeatedly in order to make these decisions, and that it works out.
Great, thank you. Ms. Zukowski?
Yeah, I hear what Mr. D'Elia is concerned about, because I understand you can't take an elementary school student teacher and actually move them up to the high school. However, what we've done is we have in our provision for certified salary, we're hedging one teaching position in that line item on page 155. That's the line item that is looking to protect, at this point, is looking to protect the head of Meadow kindergarten because of the very low projection in that particular spot. But if indeed we have, not as many in the elementary, and we've got some room for moving people back and forth, and we find that we're short one teacher in the high school, would we be able to use that money that we put into that provision for certified salary to go out and hire a high school teacher as opposed to an elementary school teacher, if it turned out to be the situation where we needed one and not the other?
Yeah, definitely. That money is just earmarked and set aside for an additional FTE teacher. And right now it looks like Head of Meadow based on the projections, but again, that can be used throughout the district.
Good point. All right. That helps. Mr. D'Elia?
I just want to comment on what Mrs. Lideline said. When I first joined the board chose not to use the paid for prediction. And that's why I'm very skeptical now. Because when my first year on this board, we said, we're not going to use the paid for company prediction. We're going to use our own internal numbers. And so that's why I'm skeptical of what the person who we paid for to do the predictions is giving me. And that's why I'm asking all these questions. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just speak to that? I think you joined in 1819, if I'm correct. But at that time we were using Malone and McBroom. And that at the time was an outdated study. We hired Malone and McBroom, I believe in 14-15. They had given us 3 projections, a high, a low, a medium, and they just weren't coming anywhere near close to our internal projections. So we've been using our internal projections up until we hired Peter Prouda in 1920, and then we used him for our 2021. And at the time, that was very relevant. It was only a year after he did the enrollment. And I did budget for an enrollment study for the next year because I believe that would be a good thing to update, especially with all the moving pieces and new housing and COVID disruption, et cetera. So.
All right, thank you. Any other enrollment discussion? Yes, Dr. Longobuco.
Thank you. Mr. D'Elia and Ms. Zukowski, I really appreciate you not forgetting about the high school. I just want to point out that a 6 student change in the high school is very different than a 6 student change in 3rd grade. I run about 75 sections of English in a given grade. And so for 6 students to fit into any of those given sections is much easier than it would be for Mr. Moretti to have to add a whole nother teacher because he surpasses that enrollment per class. So from my end, the numbers are not that concerning, and it's much easier for us to absorb because we have so many more sections to be able to do that.
This has been an incredibly informative discussion about enrollment. More details than I had ever thought of. Thank you for.
I'm very glad that I asked the question.
Me too, because it is. I mean, it truly is a big variable this year, I think, and so it's good to have the discussion. All right. So, is there any more discussion on enrollment? Anybody want to add to that? All right. Sensing no more discussion on enrollment, are there any other questions regarding the budget? Yes, Mr. D'Elia.
This is a question for Mr. Gerbert. Can you tell me, maybe just or maybe find out how much it costs to paint a classroom? I'm just curious, and I know that I asked you kind of a vague question last time, but maybe before the next meeting, could you tell me how much it costs to paint a classroom, or how you would estimate that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that okay?
Sure.
And then I was wondering how you prioritize painting of the classrooms. How do you do that? Is there something, method that you go through? Do you wait for a principal to call you up and say, come on, we got to paint this room? How does it work?
It's a little bit of that, so principals give us requests on work that they would like done in the school, but a lot of it comes down to our custodians recognizing, painting needs, plus our, myself and Paul Devine, the assistant director, assessing needs as well. So, it's primarily more so, I'd say, at the lower level schools, because they have a lot of, say, displays and stuff that are affixed to the wall and requires a little bit more care. But yeah, we do our inspections and we take feedback from all parties and decide, who kind of needs it the most.
May I continue?
Yes, Mr. Delia.
If you wouldn't mind, Bob, could you just give me a number by the next meeting of how much how you would, you would say classroom costs this to paint?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
All right, any other questions? If not, forever hold your peace till Tuesday. And then Mr. Delia.
I'd just like to make a comment that the staffing increase is, in my opinion, is very reasonable. And I just wanted to say that we've had a lot of discussions about that, but looking at it, to me, it seems like the overall change seems very reasonable to me. And I just wanted to make that comment to Dr. Rodriguez and her team. Thank you for your efforts in that regard. I think it's very thoughtfully done.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else have closing thoughts, parting wishes? I'm sensing none. All right. I think we'll close out this budget discussion then and bring us to public participation. And I don't even know if we have anyone on the line, but if there is anybody who would like to join in public participation, you can unmute yourself using *6, and we'd be happy to hear from you. You can speak to items on the budget or something you'd like to have us consider in the future. All right, I'm sensing no public participation, so we will close out public participation, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Ladline makes the motion. Mr. Cruson seconds it. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
None. So that's unanimous. And we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for all the work that you've done on. Thank you for attending our meetings. We'll see you next week. Have a good weekend.
Night, everyone.